Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this game's worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Final Fantasy XVI. The massively long-running franchise moves all the way to action for its latest installment. Is Final Fantasy XVI worthy of its pedigree? Let's find out. Final Fantasy XVI is a character action game similar in the vein of DMC or Bayonetta, with an emphasis on its rich world building, long-reaching story, and bombastic spectacle. You play as Clive, former prince turned slave soldier who is caught up in the continent's ever-present war. The world, governed by Mother Crystals, is losing its vibrancy as blight eats away at countries' borders, so those countries go to war for more territory. The rulers of these nations are dominants, basically people who can turn into icons/summons from the franchise. They're basically walking atomic bombs, leading to some interesting political ramifications. Clive quickly discovers he's one of these as well, but one no one's heard of before, and that mystery propels him and the crew forward. The story reminded me a lot of Final Fantasy XII, with its focus more on micro and macro elements of the world, and generally that works for me. The gameplay itself is split into basically two paths. First, you have the main story missions, which are linear pathways strung together with combat arenas, often interspersed with mini-bosses and ending in a massive icon fight. The second are the side missions, which have you return to some of those larger zones, usually to gather something or kill something, as well as a few large areas in the latter half of the game that you can explore, though I don't know why you'd want to. As while these open areas are gorgeous, there really isn't much to find them aside from the aforementioned side quests. But you should be here for the combat, and as mentioned, it's very DMC5 because it was made by the same guy. You only control Clyde, no party here, though you can give commands to your dog. Basically, you have a sword attack or ranged magic that's essentially a gun. You can also air juggle enemies with it, which I never thought I'd say in a Final Fantasy game, and up to 9 icon abilities depending on which 3 icons you have equipped. Your non-icon abilities never change, but finding your optional icon powers is based on your personal playstyle. While most small enemies will just fall over if you look at them, bigger enemies and bosses require you to deplete their stagger bar to deal massive damage. The bosses are easily the highlight of the combat system, providing a good mix of challenge and exciting, flashy spectacle. Of course, the real spectacle on top of that is the icon battles, where basically 2 kaiju blast away at each other in comedically excessive destruction. While gorgeous and bombastic, these employ a very stripped-down version of the combat system, making them fun to watch and a bit ho-hum to actually play. There are some RPG progression stuff here, but it's hardly worth mentioning, as you can only equip 3 pieces of equipment and 3 talismans, and the whole upgrade system feels both underbaked and excessive with the number of drops you get. There's definitely more I could say about FF16, but this review's already too long. Suffice to say, Final Fantasy finally bit the bullet and went all in on the action portion of action RPG, with some incredible visuals, flashy combat, and high concept story. So what do I like about Final Fantasy 16? Well, the combat system here, once you get more icons, really shines, especially if you learn the counter abilities. It's basically DMC5 light, and that isn't a bad thing, with lots of mechanical tweaks and options available to make the experience very flashy and satisfying. Additionally, I did enjoy this story overall, particularly its incredible world building and how dominance played into the massive political struggle, and how Clive and his crew need to figure out their place in this mess. And lastly, this game really looks incredible, and I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game, that's par for the course, but particularly the environment design and the effects are absolutely fantastic here. I really just wish performance mode actually worked so I could play it at 60 FPS. When it comes to the bad, combat does take a while to get going, and while there's a lot of mechanical depth, there isn't a ton of strategic depth. Only bosses and mini-bosses really challenge me to use all the tools in my toolbox, with most regular encounters feeling pretty mashy and easy. Additionally, there's so little RPG here, I wonder why they even bothered, with stuff like items and crafting feeling really clunky, leveling up feeling fairly pointless, and skill upgrades being the only real thing that felt worth investing in. And lastly, while I enjoyed the story, its pacing is all over the place. While I had some incredible bursts here and there, the parts that were slow are really slow, and they're bogged down even more by the game's awful side quests, which most of which are just like bad MMO fetch quests. As you know, every game's here on a 3-point scale, must play, maybe consider, and don't bother. Final Fantasy 16 is a fantastic action game with an engaging but flawed story and RPG elements put there out of obligation. As a fan of Final Fantasy since the NES days, I feel its move to action was inevitable, and I would still highly recommend it to fans of story-driven games and action games. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think of Final Fantasy 16? Its release has been surprisingly more divisive than I thought it was going to be, and while I personally wouldn't mind the next entry in the series being more RPG focused, I would like to know your opinion, so please leave it in a comment, and regardless, go out there and give FF16 a look.